Hello folks, and welcome to part 1 of my tool wall build. First thing we're going to do is make a pen and pencil holder. I'm going to make this out of a piece of black walnut. Here we're going through and figuring out our spacing for all our pen and pencil holes and get them marked with the Ink or T rule. Now we're going to use two different sizes of Forstner bit to get the pen and pencil holes drilled out. Once I got it all drilled out, I decided I didn't like the spacing or the size of the holes. So I went ahead and started back at ground one. But since I was starting over again, I thought about it and realized I could put my pencil sharpener into the block, and all I'd have to do is drill it out and chisel a place for it to sit. You can see where I've drilled out here for the pencil sharpener to sit. I've also used a bigger Forstner bit to drill out a spot in the bottom for the shavings to fall out. Now I just need to use the chisel and square up the corners for the pencil sharpener, and this part will be ready to go. Now I'm just sanding it up to mainly get rid of the burn marks that from the table saw blade and just get the whole thing cleaned up and the edges rounded over. Now I had no intention of actually putting any finish on this. It was just making a pen and pencil holder to go on the wall, but being that it was a really nice piece of black walnut, I just couldn't help myself and had to put some finish on here. And there we go, the pencil holder's all done. Now we just got to get it mounted on the wall and throw some pen and pencils in there. Here I am figuring up the holder for my Ink or T rule. This is a handy little tool, and it's marked down to a 64th of an inch all the way out to 12 inches with all these little tiny laser cut holes. Really is a handy little tool to have in the shop. What I ended up doing here is basically just sandwiching two pieces of plywood, and I threw two washers in between, just to give it a little bit of space for the T-roll to slide in there. Now we're just getting the holder for the Incra T-roll mounted up to the wall. I've got two different combination squares that I use on a regular basis, and I figured the easiest way to mount these up would be to cut a slot in a piece of plywood just big enough for the blade of the two different combination squares, and I cut the end at a 45-degree angle that when the combination square is put on there, the angle pulls the blade into the slot and keeps them held really secure. Now we're getting the two combination squares mounted to the wall. You can see better how this works. The nice thing is they all have levels built into them, so I know that I'm getting them nice and plumb as I'm getting them mounted. Here I'm marking up the spacing for the holes in this piece of plywood for mounting all my nice Freud chisels. Now you'll notice that a bunch of holes in that plywood magically appeared because I forget to hit record when I was drilling them out. Now I'm just getting the slots drilled out, or rather cut out with my jigsaw to get the chisels into the holder. Now I'm just getting some holes pre-drilled and countersunk to attach the chisel holder to a piece of plywood that's going to be the back of it and give it the support. That'll also be used to mount it to the wall. Alright, now we're just getting the chisel holder mounted to the wall using a little level to make sure it goes on there nice and straight. And going ahead and test fitting it out with all the chisels in place. Here I'm getting a holder put together for my speed square. I kind of wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but I decided just a groove in a piece of plywood, mounted at a 45-degree angle, and then another piece on the back to keep it from sliding out of that spot. Now we're just getting it mounted using my small combination square to make sure that the straight piece of plywood is nice and plumb, and then just going ahead and button up the speed square with it in the diagonally cut piece, butted up there, and just screwing it all into place. Here we're getting all the parts cut to make a holder for my small DeWalt trim router. Now we're getting the trim router holder all just put together and assembled and ready to mount. Now you can see where I forgot to think of any way to mount this before I assembled it. Luckily, I didn't have too much of a problem getting it into my Kreg pocket hole jig and getting some pocket holes drilled to help mount this to the wall. Here we're getting it all mounted up using my small level to make sure that it's going to sit nice and level. And what I did off camera is I ended up drilling a hole with a Forstner bit in the middle of that holder, so that way I don't always have to worry about making sure that the router bit is all the way up inside the router before I put it on its holder. Once again, I seem to have a problem remembering to hit the record button when I'm drilling holes for a chisel holder. This is just a small chisel holder. This is for my set of beater chisels that you really got to have. You have to have a set of chisels you don't care about, so that way you can do whatever you need to do and not worry about screwing them up. These are just some cheap ones I got at Harbor Freight. This holder's so small, I figured the easiest way to cut the slots to get the chisels into the holes was to just put it in my bench vise and use my Dozuki handsaw and just make those 6 quick cuts. Once again, using my Kreg pocket hole jig to put just a couple pocket holes in the bottom of this chisel holder to mount it to the wall. And there we go. The beater chisel mount is on the wall, and that's all we have for today. If you like my videos and you don't mind, please take the time to like and subscribe. I can't tell you how much it helps me out. Thanks a lot, folks.